So welcome to the third knowledge sharing session. Today we're going to cover pivot tables. So what are we going to help you learn today? We're going to learn custom labels, custom groups, slicers, calculated fields, and get pivot data. Now, we are assuming, of course, in group finance that everybody knows how to set up a basic pivot table, but if you do need to learn that, feel free to contact me and I'll sort you out with some material. So let's get started. So to start off with, we want to cover off just a simple thing, which is pivot table layout. Now, here you can see I've got two layouts, right? On the left is the default and on the right is the preferred layout. So how do we turn on this preferred layout? Let's watch the video. So you just select the pivot table and then you're going to go to the design, you're going to go to report layout, tabular form, and then we get that columnar approach. Then we want to change the look and feel, so a bit of blue and white Asahi in the styles, and now we've got the default best practice view. So now it's your turn on tab 1 to turn on the preferred layout of a pivot table. Pivot table naming. So when you insert a pivot table, you get a default name, pivot table 1. If you copy that pivot table, it becomes pivot table 2. So this is a bit of housekeeping for something that we're going to use later on to identify pivot tables. So you want to rename your pivot table with an appropriate context. So we select our pivot table and we right click and we're going to go to pivot table options. And then you can see at the top we can rename it. I'm going to rename this customer level 2, and that is how you rename the pivot table. As I said, later on we're going to see when we want to connect to pivot tables on different tabs, we want to identify them by name. So pivot table 1, 2 and 3 aren't really going to mean anything to us. So now it's your turn on tab 3 to rename a pivot table. So custom label trick, I just want to cover off a quick thing on naming columns, right? So as you can see here, I've got sum of volume BO2 right now. If I go to rename that, I'm going to get an error. Let's watch the video and see. So you see now I'm going to go in, I want to get rid of sum of, but Excel is going to give me an error. So there is a way around this and it's pretty simple to say the least. We're just going to go back into it now. And you literally put a space at the end, press enter, and now you've got the name you want. So it's just about knowing how to do it. So now on tab 2, it's your turn to play around with the trick of renaming your columns. Custom groups. So you have a pivot table and you've got two parts of data that you would like to merge. In this case, with the example here, is Aldi's and Coles. Let's say, for instance, they merge and now I want to take both their data and join it together to say Aldi and Coles. I also want to use that data to subtotal, etc. We can make that a custom group within the pivot table without changing the original data. So how do we do that? So we're going to highlight Aldi and Coles, right click, and we're going to go down to group, and that makes another set of data in the pivot table. I rename it Aldi and Coles, and now I'm going to subtotal, and you can see that's working like a proper set of data in the pivot table. Of course, we can remove it quite easily. Just go back to Aldi and Coles, right click, and ungroup, and it's disappeared as quickly as we put it there. So this is really good for doing quick and dirty analysis, to just merge two sets of data without having to touch the original data. So now on tab 4, the workbook that comes with it, it's your turn to have a go at custom groups. Pivot table slicers. So this is a much easier way to filter because it lets you select the data that you see in the filter box. As you can see here on the right, I've got a customer level 1 slicer, and we're going to insert this and see how it works. So we select our pivot table, then we go up to analysis, we go to insert slicer, and then we select the data that we want to slice upon, which I'm going to go to customer level 1, and that's going to give us a new box with options. Now I'm just going to resize this and move it to a proper place. As you see now, if I select groceries, it's going to filter my pivot table for me. I can remove it. Now let's put in another one, so I'm going to go to customer level 2 this time, and we're going to see that when you select one filter, it cascades those answers back to your other filters. So therefore it just leaves you with what options are available. So you can see now that's minimized the customer level 2 list, and it works vice versa if I do it to either slicer. And obviously you can remove your filters pretty easily with the X, and that is how you insert slicers and filter far easier than an ordinary slicer. So now it's your turn on tab 5 to have a go at insert slicers. So moving slicers. So slicers can easily be moved to another tab in a workbook, and the reason you would do this is you can move your slicer to, let's say, the first tab on your workbook. Somebody opens the workbook, makes a selection, and it controls the slicer. The really good thing about this, which we'll cover in a little bit, is that one slicer can control many pivot tables. So someone would open your spreadsheet, use an option on the slicer, and that will drive all the other tabs in your spreadsheet. So how do we do this? So you highlight the top part of the slicer and you literally just copy, or you can cut, move it to another sheet, paste, and now you see I'll click export, and that's going to go back and it is going to drive that pivot table. So it's pretty simple once you know how to do it. Now it's your turn on tab 5 to copy and paste your filters. So slicer connections. This is where one slicer can connect many pivot tables. Now there's one caveat to this, that the pivot tables, it must stem from the same data source that it's going to control. So you can see here I've got a list of all the pivot tables that are in this workbook that are from the same data set. And I can select any one of those, and that's going to attach to my slicer, and then when you select one thing on the slicer, it's going to apply to all those pivot tables. So let's see how we do this. So we select our slicer, then we go to report connections, we get the available list. I'm going to select one on sheet 3, I'm going to make a selection, we're going to move to that now, and we'll see that it took effect. Come back, take it off, and it's fine. We're back to the tab again, and now we'll see how we can remove a connection as easily as we added it. So now it's your turn on tab 7 to get your slicers to control many pivot tables. So by default, your slicer's got one column. As we can see here, I've got another slicer that's got 3 columns. Now you may want to do this for presentation purposes, to fit your slicers around your pivot table, or if they're all on your front page, you just might prefer to have it wider as opposed to being long. So how do we change the columns in our slicer? So we select our slicer, and then we go up to our options. You can see out at the far right, we're going to have columns. So if I click that up to 2, 3, etc., you're going to see it's going to expand out. And I'm just going to widen it, and I'm going to shorten it to make it look pretty. And now we've got 3 columns on a slicer. Of course, you can increase that or reduce it as you see fit, depending what your needs are. So it's pretty easy to do, to add a few more columns to your slicer. So now it's your turn on tab 8 to increase the column numbers. Now, slicer settings. You can see here I've got my slicer settings options. I'm just going to talk you through this, so there's no actual video, but I will get you to have a play around with it. So you can see I've got a name of my slicer, so that really is only useful for VBA and macros, so let's not worry about it. The display header, you might want to change the caption, what actually turns up on your slicer in Excel, so you can change that there. You can sort it from A to Z or Z to A. You can also use custom lists. So we covered this in the first session, so you can make your own custom sort list and get your slicer to be sorted by that. And then the important thing here on the bottom right is show items deleted from the data source. So if you had, let's say, 2014 data in a pivot table along with 2015, and you move on to 2016 and you just want 2016 and 15, the slicer will forever show the 2014 options even if you've deleted that data from your data set. So if you unclick that, you won't see the data that is no longer present in your data source. So it's very important because it can be quite annoying. So now on tab 9, it's time for you to have a play around with your slicer options. Calculated fields. So this is where in a pivot table you can add in your own sums. So in this example, we're going to have the volume for actuals and volumes for budget, and I want the pivot table to show the variance. So that can show up as an extra column that you can add in. So how do we do this? We select our pivot table, then we're going to go up to fields and items, calculated fields, and then we're going to name it variance. Then we're going to go down and select what we want in our sum. So I've got volume actuals minus volume budget. I go OK, and now you can see it's appeared in column E as sum of variance. So now if we wanted to change that, we just go back into the field settings and then we can see variance, and there we have it. We delete it and it's disappeared as quickly as it was added in. So that's how you add in a calculated field. Now it's your turn on tab 10 to add one in yourself. So top 10 filter on a pivot table. So it's quite easy to apply a top 10 filter on a pivot table through various means in the pivot table. Of course, you can do bottom 10, you can do bottom 8, top 8, etc. There's a lot of options to do it. So let's have a look. So we're going to select where we want to filter on. And this is on product pack level 2. Top 10. Now you can see I can select what I want to do it on. I'm going to do it on volume, and now it's pretty easy. So we can clear that off. Now we could also filter on the labels. So here we're going to do what contains the word cans. So I only want to see products that are cans. And there we go, we filtered by that. So it's pretty easy and pretty easy to remove as well. So now it's your turn on tab 11 to have a go at top 10 filters. So get pivot. This is how we extract data from a pivot table in a dynamic fashion. It's essentially a formula that you can feed data into to pull out what month or what product you would like from a pivot table. So here we have the sum. I'm just going to explain briefly how it works. So here, first up you can see get pivot data. So that's the actual formula. Then you've got volume actuals. So that's the measure that we're talking about in the pivot table. And we've got 12 get pivot A1, so that's the location of the pivot table that we're going to be extracting from. And we've got month 1, so 1 is the value for the month that we're pulling from. Then we've got customer level 1 and grocery, so grocery is belonging to customer level 1. Then customer level 2, we've got Aldi. So what we're going to do in this example is we're going to feed Aldi and we're going to feed the month numbers to the get pivot data formula, and we'll see how it's dynamic. So you can see here I'm going to type equals, and I'm going to select something there. I'm going to select Aldi month 1 on my other pivot table, and we're going to go in now and we're going to change this to make it dynamic. So the 1, I'm going to feed that 1 from C3. Going to put some dollar signs into absolute it. We're going to go down to customer level 2 now and get rid of Aldi. And we're going to feed that from B3. So again, we're going to put in some dollar signs to absolute it. We're going to drag that down. Across, and then down. And we'll see that it's dynamic in taking the feeds of 1, 2, 3, Aldi, Coles, and the Woolworths group. So let's just sum that and check it. So indeed, it does add up. So that's how we do dynamic get pivot data formulas, and now it's your turn on tab 12 to try that out. So that's it for pivot tables in this knowledge sharing session. The next couple of weeks we are going to cover data visualizations with some dashboards, new macros, we're going to do some SAP training, but importantly, if there's anything you guys would like to learn, please feel to contact me. You can contact myself, Alan, Deepa or Jess. Until next time, take it easy.